Okay, welcome to another tutorial video. This one again is on Argue, Persuade, Advise, but this time we're going to be revising it rather than going through it in detail. So I'm just going to quickly zip through some of the basic elements, and then we're going to look specifically at getting an A star. And to do that, obviously, we're going to look at a mark scheme, and we're going to look at an A star example that was officially marked by AQA themselves. So this isn't my opinion or another teacher's opinion. This is what AQA are actually looking for, and part of the documentation that we're using is what they actually send out to teachers as example of A star. So hopefully that will guide us in the right direction. So first of all, the most key thing we need to know is that Argue, Persuade, Advise is worth 27 marks, and 18 of those actually come from my ideas or what you're talking about. Do you get those argue, persuade, or advising element across well? And then 9 of the marks are for the quality of your writing, technical accuracy with regards to spelling, punctuation, layout, etc. Now, all of argue, persuade, advise are elements of the same skill, which is basically your ability to convince someone of something. Now, persuade can be seen as the most passionate, argue is the most considered, and advise is generally the most rational. So it's good to get into mindsets in your head if you want to think about how to write. Persuade, you'd be thinking more like a salesman, really trying to get something across. Argue, you'd be thinking like a lawyer. Obviously, you're supporting your point while saying why the other point is bad, not as good. And advise is the most rational. Basically, you think like a doctor, someone giving advice. But it's not really any difference to them whether you take it or not. You also got to remind it really important, depending on the question, who you're writing to, and you've got to write with the appropriate tone and register. If those terms aren't familiar to you, then the tone is basically, imagine it as your voice. How would you sound, or how do you sound in your letter? Is it angry, respectful, pleading, friendly, etc., etc.? And the register is basically the formality level. So say you're asked to give a speech. If the speech was to your peers in school, then obviously you might have a more friendly register in terms of the words that you're actually using with the language, etc., and be slightly less formal, maybe use a nickname of someone in the audience. But if you were giving the same thing, the same talk to a bunch of MPs, then obviously you're going to be far more formal and respectful and use more complex language. Now, laying out correctly is also important. This isn't something that's going to get you dozens and dozens of marks, but it just helps make it a little more accurate for you. So we'll have a quick look at this here. So for example, with a speech, you've got a relevant opening to your speech, and then you're going to always have 5 or 6 paragraphs. Really, it should be about 2 pages. And then you're going to, you could reference the audience. So all of our families here, the person at the back, etc., we have all seen, just to make it sound like you're actually there in the moment. And then through your 5 paragraphs, you actually want to dot little differences, because it's a written piece and you know that it's a speech, using oral techniques. That's techniques that actually appeal to the ear, appeal to sound, would be quite beneficial. So if you can imagine putting in onomatopoeia or perhaps alliteration as well, then obviously that's going to flow a little smoother. This sheet is a student's work which I've scanned, and it's up on Fronter, so if you want to access that, there is another video with the link to it, and I'll put the link and the password up at the end of this video as well. Again, if you're looking for a letter, then obviously you've got the recipient's address, your address, the date, RE, what it's regarding. You can do it, you cannot do it, it's up to you. The varied opening depending on who it's to, so it could be this, dear madam, dear head counsellor, etc., etc. You can make up a name, not a problem. Again, your 5 paragraphs, and you want to close it with an appropriate send-off. Open your paragraphs with, however, another conjunctions or connectives, depending on obviously your task. Moving on a little more, if you're writing an essay, well, this is just quite clear. Obviously, you have your intro, which is basically like one of the other video states, a triangle. So you go from something broad into something specific. Then you go through the actual elements that you want to talk about. And here, these little dashes, think of them as like literary techniques that you want to use. So here you might actually use a piece of alliteration. Here you might want to use a rhetorical question, etc. But again, you want to have 5 paragraphs and avoid the use of I or other personal pronouns. Try and be formal. Generally, if you're writing an essay to anyone, it's going to be formal. And in conclusion, you sum up what you've said. Now, obviously, that one's quite obvious, so we move on to something that doesn't come up very often, but it's good to know how to approach it if it does. So here we have a leaflet layout, and basically in your paragraphs, you're going to have subheadings, which might be quite cool or relevant. You can have your writing. Normally when you're asked about a leaflet, it's something persuasive, so it could be produce a leaflet persuading people to go to a theme park, etc. So you can put in lots of persuasive writing and literary techniques, and then you can also add a box that says image. Don't draw an image, you don't need to do that at all, but just that you've got the awareness is obviously well laid out, and obviously you can put a caption, a catchy caption underneath, which actually might make it a little more interesting, etc. And also you can use bullet points if you are doing a leaflet, so just just make sure that you're aware of how a leaflet looks before you try and attempt that question. And lastly, obviously, is one of the things that you could be asked to write is an article. So with your article layout, then you've got a headline, which is basically something clever and somehow or obvious. And then you've got your strap line, which is basically a summary of the article, and a byline, so who it's by and what position that they actually have. Why is this person in particular who we are listening to? You do not write in columns. I repeat, you do not write in columns. You write in normal paragraphs, like roughly 5 or 6, depending on what you are planning to do and what your subject is, and you can use a subheading if relevant. And what we've put here is drop characters in and out, and basically that just means use testimonials, so refer to someone from university, refer to someone from a parent if it's a support group, etc., depending again on what it is. You can make them up, but just please make them believable. So say Mr. Smith from Durham University rather than Joey McJoe from McJoeland. That's not going to be of any relevance. And one thing that's always taken down well in articles is facts and statistics, etc., etc., etc. So if any of that comes up, hopefully you'll have an idea of how to do it. So we move back on to the rest of the ideas before we move on to the specific A-star stuff. You have to make sure that you use at least 6 different pieces of punctuation. That's just a little head start to make sure that you have a high level when it comes to that out of 9 mark. The paragraphs have to be linked and shaped. Shaped basically means that they are specific, so you are not trying to put 3 points in one paragraph. You know that each paragraph deserves its set amount of time. And linked basically means you can actually use connectives well, so also, furthermore, etc. And there should be a variety of sentence lengths and paragraphs, so it doesn't sound monotonous. Now, each paragraph should make a point, explain why that point is valid, give an example, and then stress and emphasize it somehow. Again, that's just basic writing. Each paragraph could be about 5 to 8 lines, depending on what you're going to do. And we're going to look at an A-star example, like I said, in a little bit, so you can break it down. And each paragraph should contain a couple of techniques each from something called the forest. I don't know what your teacher obviously would have taught you with regards to that, but basically it stands for alliterations, facts, opinions, blah, 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 all the stuff that you see down here on this list. So you can actually do this match technique that if you want to do it, but basically just in every paragraph try and include a couple, which again we'll see in a second. And to get a C, you probably write at least 4 or 5 paragraphs that link and stick to the topic. So moving on, we'll drag this across here and we will look at a mark scheme for the said point. Now, we're not going to look at the low marks, but I'm just going to look at the question. For example, write an article in which you argue for or against the view that people should not be encouraged to take part in dangerous sports or activities. Now, every year there's a question similar to this in terms of the layout, but obviously the thing that will change is whether you're asked to do this. What's actually changed again is you're asked to do this, and then obviously the main prompt itself, whatever that is, but the mark scheme for it is always the same. So there's skills that are being looked for and content descriptors. Now the content descriptor changes year on year, but the skills descriptor does not. So 1 or 2 marks is basically a U. We're going to go all the way to like the higher marks, the A star. And even if you are a C grade student, please don't be put off here. Looking at the AA star stuff is actually probably the best thing you can actually do, because if you aim for the stars you get the moon, but if you aim for the moon you stay here on Earth, or some other cheesy metaphor. Now, so basically we look at the skill and the content, the thing that we're actually looking to do. So basically with the skill, the form, so that means basically you've laid it out correctly. The content and style are assuredly matched to the purpose and the audience. So basically everything you write is confidently and well written exactly to the audience. It's distinctive, so it actually stand out. What you're saying is clever and memorable, and it's consistently effective. So all the way through your piece, it's actually making clear sense and you're doing all the things that you should be doing. It's also controlled and sustained crafting. So basically when you're saying crafting here, there's actually a rhythm to how it's put together, and it's a pleasure to read, with highly effective and delightful vocabulary choices. This obviously is quite vague. I don't know who gets delighted in a vocabulary choice, but basically what it's looking for there is something that was just a wonderful touch that can be quite classy, as it were. Now, with the actual content, it may use satire or irony, so that's basically like clever humor, but it's fitting and in context, so you're not trying to be funny. It's fitting for where it's actually supposed to be. Demonstrates intellectual rigor, so it's actually quite complex what you're looking through. and the ability to integrate a range of complex details from varied sources. So you might be putting on statistics and quotes to actually support your point. Discursive markers and rhetorical devices are integrated into the whole seamlessly and persuasively. So basically this just means you are getting people to think, and you are shaping your writing well, and it's coming into the whole thing without actually being obstructive. So you shouldn't feel like a person's used something too many times. So for example, when I mentioned this to one of my students who was going for a C, I thought he'd get a B. He did an exam and he got a C in the end, which he was satisfied with, but I was disappointed with. So I called his paper back. When I called through his paper back, I actually noticed that he'd used, and the examiner had counted them, 17 instances of alliteration. So obviously there, that device that he's trying to use is literally just getting in the way. It's becoming a bit stupid. And the examiner, who's not getting paid to write comments, actually wrote at the bottom, "This student is a huge fan of alliteration," and it was very weak. Thankfully, he redid the paper next opportunity and got an A, because he calmed down and shaped his writing a lot better. And basically, last thing here, may use inventive, structural, or linguistic devices. So obviously there's going to be something clever in the way it's set out. Now, for regards to, that's for the 18 marks, and with regards to the actual marks, here we see here the sentence structures, punctuation, and spelling. Basically, all you have to do is use full sentences, have a high level of spelling, high level of accuracy and punctuation, be clear and controlled, accurate spelling again, and a range of punctuation. That's why I mentioned earlier to try and use 6, so you can actually show it's being used properly. There is another tutorial video that does have a breakdown of the how to use punctuation, etc. Maybe we can do it again in another tutorial video, but just make sure you got the range. So for example, don't just use full stops and commas, try and use full stops, commas, semicolons, dashes, exclamation marks, question marks, etc., etc. So now that we've gone all through that, and you can download this from the AQA website area, here's the actual link address if you want it. But basically, if you go to the AQA past papers, go to English A, and then look for any past mark scheme or any mark scheme. This one here is from November 08, but you can actually look in for anyone. So now that's the A star marking covered. So now we'll actually have a look at the A star